Right, it is 5 o'clock, so we will call the Round Rock Independent School District Board of Trustees called board meeting for Thursday, March 4th, 2021 to order. We do have a quorum present. All trustees are in attendance. If we can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Right, we don't have any public comment for tonight, and we actually do not have any reason to go into closed session. So we are going to jump right to item F, our development of board student outcome goals, and I will turn it over to our LSG coach, Mr. Cinto Ramos. Thank you.
Well, I guess I would ask if we are able to go into closed session just to do a brief a briefing. As I think, how do we phrase that, Dr. Presley? How was it in a minute?
Are we doing to deliberate and conduct a self-evaluation?
No. What was the other part on there?
It's with attorneys to discuss the duties, roles, and responsibilities.
Okay. I think that's what we were talking about. Are attorneys here?
No, I think that's the issue is we don't have attorneys here tonight, so the posting does not match up with what you would want to talk about. So.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll proceed. We'll punt, as we say, in Leadership ISD. Well, welcome, and good to see all of you. Brought with me CEO of Leadership ISD, Patricia Arvanites. She and I work together with boards around the state. And after completing Lone Star Governance, I called her and asked her to join me in this process with Round Rock ISD. So we've put together some slides. We've been able to visit with your administrative team for a little bit in preparation for tonight. And we're going to roll up our sleeves with you as a board and start digging in on what is in your framework, Vision 1 in particular, which is the board adopting student outcome goals. We are clear and know that you all have, the previous board had adopted goals. We find ourselves in an opportunity with a whole new majority of a board that are new to just visit and let's do some group work around that and see what's coming up for this new board. And, we know that we've got House Bill 3, ones that we want to talk about as well, but let's just see what's important to this board. What are the values for you as a collective group? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Patricia, and then we'll get started.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I'll try and stay focused on this microphone as best I can. I usually get to move around a little bit more. As Cinto said, I am the co-founder and CEO of Leadership ISD and have been doing board work, organizational change management, and governance for about the last 10 years across Texas, and have worked with several boards, many boards across the state. And so we're excited to be here with you guys, especially since it's fresh off of your Lone Star Governance training. We're going to kind of look at this as a little bit more like visionary governance. So not just strictly Lone Star Governance, but how do we grow that? How do we look at this goal setting, the constraint setting as a process? And what does that look like to create kind of a... So I don't want you to think that this is just a check-the-box training. This is just the first part of a process to establish a vision and values that's grounded in your community and what your community wants, and it'll help you in many ways. One is to establish where you want to go, where we want to go, right, and then how we want to get there. Two is this is a great process to create a leadership profile. This is a district that is searching for a new superintendent. So what does that leadership profile look like, and how can we use this goal process, the vision and values process, to get there, to get to a leadership profile so that when you are hiring the next leader for your district, that they are able to implement under the vision and values of the community. So that's really what this process is, and I know that you've had had the opportunity to do some great work with your leadership team now, and I also understand that 3 of you have already gone through this process, right? This may be a little different than what you did before, and then it's great for the 4 new trustees to be able to think through this data, to have dialogue with you about the data, about your community, about your vision and values, and about the work that you've seen your leadership team, especially in a really difficult time, go through in the last year. So that's a little bit about me. That's what we are. And we're going to start it off. This may be feel a little different than your normal board training, so, I hope you'll hang with me. But we're going to start this off just with one word, a one-word check-in. I just want to know what you are walking in with. Just one word. When we start, is it okay to start with you?
Leadership?
Leadership.
Responsibility.
Optimistic. She stole mine. I'm going to say I'm actually happy. I'm very happy right now.
I want to say relieved, but I think happy and elated also, because yesterday, teachers and school staff got the opportunity to be eligible to be vaccinated, and today we announced that, we had a big way for them to get vaccinated Saturday and all of next week, and to me, that was weighing so heavy on me that I hate to say relieved, but I'm so relieved that they all get to have this opportunity. I'm just so full of joy for that.
Curious. Focus.
I would say interested. Very interested.
And I would say my word is renewal.
I'm excited.
Encourage.
Sorry. That's exciting. Okay. So can we advance the slide, please? A couple more. There. So we had a couple of objectives. We started with our one-word check-in. We're going to ground ourselves a little bit before we start into the work. We really want to think about this as a process, but we're going to ground ourselves in the good so we can get to the great. And then we're going to do a little setup. I really want you to do some kind of self-reflection. I'm going to steal a little bit from Brené Brown, in case if anybody's familiar with Brené Brown. What does success look like for you? What do you think will hold us back? And then we're going to dive into the goal setting. So that's our objectives. Next slide, please. And these are just a few things that I hope that you'll consider as we walk through, right? As I said earlier, this is a process. It's not going to, we know that the data is the data, right? So we're not going to shift that overnight. We're going to have to build a journey to excellence, to renewal. I think renewal was a word back here, or somewhere. And so we're gonna work through this, and it's gonna be a dialogue. You all are gonna have a dialogue with each other, and you're gonna build a dialogue with your leadership team as well. And I know you already are doing that, so I just want that to be a part of this process. And then let's create a cycle of accountability and shared decision making. Your community is a part of this. Balanced governance includes the community. So we're going to ask you after this session to talk to your community a little bit, to reflect on the work that you did tonight and find out how they feel about it. And then it's going to be collaborative, right? This is to create a leadership profile, and there are experts behind me here that also understand that and know what should be included in that profile. So we'll look at those things collaboratively, I hope. Go ahead, a couple of slides. So you've got one more. You've got some sticky notes in front of you. And I'd like you to just take a minute and write down, give yourself some permission. What do you need to feel, to do, or to not do, to show up for this work together as a board? We are looking, this is together as a board. What do you think? But I want you to answer this individually. What is it? And I gave you some examples. Ask for what you need. Like if you don't understand something, stop. Let's make sure you are clear on everything, right? Time for process. Some people are internal processes. Some people take a little longer. Let's pause. Let's not fill the room with words. Let's take some time. If you're triggered, we're going to talk about that. We're going to stop and we're going to address that, right? And be vulnerable. And then we're going to name race, right? This is a board that I know is interested in talking about equity, and you have students from all populations here in Round Rock, and so let's make sure that we're not afraid to name race. So you can just write that word on your permission slip, and you can have more than one, but just keep that in front of you and reflect on it, and that'll just kind of set the tone, I hope, for as you move forward. And the second thing I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to just answer a couple of questions for me. What do you need to show up and do the work? So, what is your expectation? What does success look like for you guys tonight? And this one I'm going to actually go around and ask you. What does success look like? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about it, though. I don't want to rush you. You can write that down as well. What does success look like for you? And maybe this is just the first part of that journey of success, but what does that look like?
So are you saying the success for tonight? It's coming out of tonight, what are we hoping for?
Yeah, and just as as this initial stage in the journey, what does success look like for you? And then I want you to just answer the question, what would hold you back? What would hold you back? Okay, so how about we start on this side of the room and just say, just briefly, what does success look like for you?
So I can take success as overall for our board and for what we'll end up with. So it's when we are student focused and making choices based on student needs and having good data-driven measures tied to our goals.
And what about just for tonight?
So I think that was probably the having good data-driven measures. That's what I was hoping to do tonight,
Great.
tied to our goals.
Thank you.
Mine are tonight and beyond. So success looks like building synergy with shared goals. It looks like radical honesty. It looks like prioritizing student outcomes over adult fragility, and hoping to have a clearer picture of who we are looking for a new superintendent.
Corey?
So I wrote articulating the values and priorities of this board. That's kind of my goal for tonight. Having gone through this process before, if we can actually get to a point where we have, exactly the measures, that would be insane. And honestly, I don't think it's going to happen tonight, because what happens is we set the values and priorities, and then the administration kind of tries to find ways we can measure those. So that's why for me tonight, I just want us to articulate the values and priorities of this board.
So for me tonight, success would be a roadmap. If we could come out of here with a roadmap, not just, for the board, for the district, for looking for our superintendent, and as part of that, an idea of where we have consensus, I think similar to what Corey has said, where we agree.
I'll be real honest, I don't really have a definition of success for tonight, because I know that each one of us takes different time to process, and not really sure how far along in the process we'll go. So I don't really have a definition for success. So,
Do you have, and that's fair, do you have a, what about that second question? Do you have a feeling of something that would hold you back from having the process and moving it forward? Anything?
no, I've been a huge supporter of Lone Star governance from the very beginning, and have always wanted to be doing this job, to be student focused, and really just staying in our lane talking about student outcomes. But I don't think I have anything holding me back.
Thank you.
Well, I thought that the whole point tonight was that we would be setting our goals. So I'm a little bit surprised to hear some talk that we may not get there. So that's why I'm here, just so everybody's clear, is to set our goals tonight. For me, what success looks like tonight is living up to the change that we talked about and advocated for to get to these seats. That's what I think success looks like, is living up to all of the things that we all spent many months talking about to get here.
Okay, thank you.
What I hope to get from tonight is feel challenged, feel like motivated to work hard to achieve something. That's what I hope to get.
Does anybody want to share anything that's going to hold them back? Sure.
So I think for me, the thing that I feel like is being weighed down by other non-student outcome related concerns. That's the thing that I have to just focus, and I hope all of us have to focus, because there's a lot going on right now. And in so many specters, and just to be here, be focused on this work in this moment.
And sorry. Oh. So the thing holding me back is long sentences and wordy descriptions. I would like to see something concise, something quantifiable result. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
I was going to say the thing that I would hold me back would being told that something isn't possible.
I'll share. So for me, I think it's the understanding that student outcomes is multifaceted, and that it can mean different things to different people, and people are complex. And so driving down into, I hear a lot of, we want to box in student outcomes, but there's a lot of things that go into student outcomes. So I'm a professor, so I understand I'm in the classroom. It's not just a grade that's a student outcome. So I think sometimes just when we say student outcomes, I think everybody has a different meaning of what that is. So for me, that just kind of holds back the conversation, I guess. So
I'll share that one thing that concerns me is my understanding is we're going to try to limit ourselves to 5 goals. And when I think about the fact that we have 48,000 students, 55 campuses, 7,000 employees, one thing that holds me back is it's going to be hard to take, like Mary said, people are complex and there are a lot of needs, and 5 goals isn't a lot, but I do agree that's probably the right number so that we can be productive.
I think I identified with what you said, Mary, and I would like to add thinking that student outcomes are only quantifiable, like hard number test score outcomes. I think that there's a lot that we can do around culture and what it's like to be in our district, and so I hope that we will consider, those types of goals as well.
So thank you. Thanks for sharing. So we're gonna talk about this, and this is good grounding for me, just as we walk through. And there may be some moments where you don't feel like we're getting where you want us to go, but as I said, it's a process. We will end up, I think, at a place where you will all consider this success, but it is going to take a little time. It's going to take a little time. And so I want to ground this in not necessarily the student outcome goals, which we will talk about. Also, to your point, there's outcomes, there is academic outcomes, and there's experience, right? And so that's why there is vision and there's values. There is a goalpost, and there's how we want to get down that field, right? And so we're going to talk about both of those. Student experience, social and emotional, educator experience, those parent experiences, those are all very important outcomes that we need to discuss, but they don't necessarily fit in that student outcome park, right? So we're gonna talk about that. But before we go, because we're grounding this in our vision, I want you to think back. How many of you have lived in Round Rock for over 10 years? Okay. How many have children here? Okay. And so this is your community, right? You care about Round Rock. You care about the community. You care about the school district. Your children are here. And so there's a reason you're here. There's a reason you're here, right? So if we go to the next slide, 2 more slides, please. There. Then I want us to, just before we move forward and we dig into the data and we dig into the dialogue, I want you to take a minute and think about what you are proud of for Round Rock ISD. You have had some pretty amazing educators doing some really, really difficult work, especially over the last year, and I know you've probably acknowledged that and you've seen that work, but and you've got some wonderful educators behind you that have been guiding this district, but I would be curious to know, name it. What are you proud of? What are you proud of for Round Rock ISD? I'd love to hear it. We could start in the middle and go out.
When you said that, the word that I wrote down was love. I feel like my kids have been so loved in this district. I mean, the teachers, librarians, counselors, from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. I mean, just taken care of and made to feel welcome. And I mean, they all had a great education, but just loved.
I would say the one thing that, especially over the last 12 months, that I'm most proud of is the resilience. The resilience I've seen in our staff and in our students, and their ability to bounce back from basically a lot of loss. Even our teachers, they didn't go into teaching to teach in front of a computer. And our students don't all love the environment that they're in, but their ability to be resilient and make the best that they possibly can. Some are doing better than others, and hopefully we'll get back to whatever normal is at some point. But I am most proud of the resilience that I have seen.
Both of those are really good, and I think that probably all of us would name several things, but for the sake of brevity, I'm gonna say opportunity and access. Part of my K through 12 experience was spent in an inner city, underfunded public school. So I know what it looks like to have basic needs of students go unmet. The families that lived in our apartment complex had children, my peers, who for years of their education, their needs went unmet. I have older children who grew up different public schools around the country. And not every child has the opportunity and access that my younger children have had in this district for over a decade. And that's not lost on me. And that's what I'm very proud of.
So I only been in one ISD, so I don't have comparison. But personally, I feel like Round Rock ISD has excellent fine art programs, which I love. And also in general, I think my perception is I feel that professional. For the past year, there's a lot of controversial things. They always, like, for any issues, there are always two sides, right? One agree, one disagree. But I see administrator and teacher and staff are taking a lot of beating on various different issues. And I definitely see the professionalism coming out of this. Thank you.
So for me, it's probably academic excellence. It's something that I think affords us opportunities like great fine arts and great athletics. And I think it's demanded by the community, and I think it builds everybody up. So similar to Danielle, came from a poor background, and I just know that when people that can demand academic excellence, then it pulls everybody up with them, and it's just makes me really proud of this community that we have parents that demand that, and that the community demands it, and the staff demands it, and Dr. Presley demands it. So that's what I'm proud of.
I'm proud of the passion, particularly of educators, because I'm an educator myself. But it's even in the small things. I got to attend a baseball game today, so to see students coping and navigating with, some of the restrictions that life has handed them to still practice their passion, that's really amazing, and I'm excited to see that fire still in our district.
So I'm proud of the amazing programs and staff and parents in our district that attract people to this district from all over the world. We were in a meeting earlier this week, and I was sharing how up until a couple months ago, I had no immediate neighbors who were from the United States. I had to my right, they were from Turkey. To my left, they moved here from Australia. Across the street, they're from India, China. I mean, I have friends from the Balkans. I have friends from Colombia, Lebanon, just Sri Lanka. I mean, you name the country. And they came to live in my neighborhood to attend Round Rock ISD schools because of the amazing reputation, because of the amazing programs and staff and parents that are in our district.
To the leadership team now.
I've got a lot to be proud of. If I look Shortlands, since the pandemic, and somebody said it before, the resilience of our staff and how everybody has done their very best. Every day they come to work and bring their best to serve our kids, and that's something I'm very, very proud of, even under difficult circumstances. But I think the opportunities we have here for students are unrivaled. And we're always looking to do better. We're always looking to expand, and so I'm very proud of that.
I think I feel some of the ways that Amy does. because when I go into campuses or go into classrooms to visit, I always feel the warmth and the intentional community building that happens in the classrooms. And that's very inspiring to me, and I'm happy for the students that are lucky enough to go to school here.
I've been fortunate enough to work in 6 districts in Texas, and so I've seen the gamut. And this is obviously the last district in where we chose to land so that my students, my personal kids, could graduate from Round Rock ISD schools. And I think what drew me then and what continues to draw me in is the commitment and passion and the love of the people that make up this district. We're a district of people who truly, truly care about kids.
And I think that ties into mine as well, and going back to what Dr. Zhao said, I think it's the professionalism. I've been here less than 4 months, but the extraordinary professionalism that has been exhibited every day in some very difficult times has been impressive.
I would say, like Mandy, but from a different lens, I've had the opportunity to be in so many districts, not just across Texas, but in different parts of the country. And it never ceases to amaze me, much like you said, Trustee Bone, the level of excellence and opportunity for our students. I'm privileged to have the team that gets to tell the stories of these kids. And, you know, we just did a story about a young man who developed an app that's helping people with vision tests on the other side of the world. Not only did he have the ability to do that, and his teachers were able to help him with that, but he also had the heart, and the inspiration to do something so entrepreneurial. And that's a testament to our students, to their parents, but also our wonderful educators that clear the path and lift those kids up and teach them those skills.
So we all have so much to be proud of, right? And you just shared all of it. Educators, there's just a lot of great work, it sounds like, that is happening in Round Rock ISD. And so I want, as we're moving forward, I want us to keep that in mind, right? That there is a lot of great stuff happening in Round Rock ISD, things that have drawn you to this community, that make you proud of the work. And so as we're looking forward, now, does that mean we're at where we want to be? No, we always strive to be better. There shouldn't be a district in this country that doesn't strive to be better, right? Our students deserve the very best, the very best. So we're always going to strive to get better. And that means all of our students. So we're going to have to be honest with ourselves and look at our data and say, okay, are there gaps? Are there trends? Is there things that we need to adjust? What do we need to do? And then that's where we set our goals. That's where we set our goals. We don't set our goals in the place where we're already doing really great, right? We set our goals to try and move and improve. And so keeping in mind what's really great allows us to know that, okay, we've got some room for improvement, but we haven't fallen off the edge here, right? So that's an important thing to ground ourselves in, and to remember that your educators, your students, the parents in this district, of which most of you are incredibly proud of this district. And they have put you in a place for you to be responsible because they want to continue to be proud of this district. And they want their children to continue to get an excellent education. And that is your responsibility, to hold that vision and value, you as trustees. That is your role as governance. Their role is to get us there. Their role is to implement, to innovate, to do all of the things. And that's the other part of this goal-setting process, and the goals that I don't think we always discuss, is these are set and the constraints are set not to be punitive, not to box in your educators, but to let your educators loose, to create the space and the cover for them to innovate, for them to initiate strategies that will allow us to close those gaps, that allow us to move on those trends. And so that's what this process is about. It is a collaborative process. It is not a stick. It's a carrot. It's and that's what's exciting about governance in this framework. And it hadn't always operated that way. right? So you guys have seen, and I'm not saying this for Round Rock ISD, I'm saying in any governance. Before I go on, you have anything you want to add in here? You good? All right, good. I get on a roll and then I forget.
Actually, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that setting goals, the goals should focus things that needs improvement, not things that we're already doing great. But so far we're talking about things are already doing great. We never really talk about things that need improvement. So I'm just curious, what is the process of setting the goals?
We're going to go through the whole process of setting the goals. And so if I understand your question, and correct me if if I didn't, the process is that we're going to look at data. We're going to have some dialogue. We're going to consider what your community wants and desires, what you as community members want. And we're going to identify those areas that need improvement, those areas that we want, that are so important, so critical, that we're going to set a goal around. And then we're going to identify some guardrails. Because you have values in this community, and you want your future leader, you want your leadership team to go in the direction of those outcomes, but there are certain things that are non-negotiables. Does that make sense? So that's the process.
Thank you.
And it may not be as linear as you want because, to your point, where you said earlier that you would like to have those student outcome goals tonight at the end of this meeting, well, I might be disappointing you on that one because it does take some time to get there. Now, we can identify the student outcomes that are very important. We can look at the baselines because we got the leaders behind us. But we have to think about what is achievable and how are you going to resource that achievement, right? So that's an important conversation. So these are ongoing conversations to clean this up. So what we will end up with is a set of parameters, a set of student outcome suggestions, preliminary goals that will go back out to the district to double check, to create what that's going to look like, to bring in goal progress measures, if they're different, and also for you to go back out to your community and say, does this reflect your vision? Are these what you want us to focus on? Because you were elected to represent their vision. And so that's going to be the process. Anything else? You want to move forward? All right. So I'm going to just remind you of a few things from your governance training just before we go into where we're just going to start to have dialogue about the data. All right, so next slide, please. Next one, please. Okay, so you guys probably saw something similar to this in Lone Star Governance, or maybe you didn't. But this is, in Texas and across the nation, we've had governance that has looked on either side of these, right? We're looking and striving for balanced governance. Balanced governance is informed oversight that is engaged with each other, which is engaged with your community, and collaborative with your leadership team. We don't want uninformed. You don't want to hire a superintendent and hope that they are Superman or Superwoman and then take your hands off the wheel. Because that's not what collaborative balanced governance is, and that's not what you were elected to do. You're ultimately responsible for those goals and for student outcomes, right? We also don't want to hire a great superintendent or have a great superintendent and be holding them back, throwing barriers in front of them or in front of their team, right? That doesn't get us to where we want to go, and that doesn't serve children. So balanced is trying to find something in the middle. Any questions about that? Any thoughts? Cinto, anything to add?
No. I mean, this is going to be that challenging part for a board when you set your goals and then leaning into that urge to want to get into a micromanagement situation. Completely appropriate to be asking questions and data-focused questions. And as we talked about Lone Star Governance, then there's that other type of behavior that takes us off course and sends staff in a whole direction that will be absorbing their time. So as we go on this journey and we lean into this governance tool, we'll be able to identify some potential challenges for us as a board, or for you as a board, and for us as a team, to see where we might be. We're going to make mistakes, especially with the new board. We're going to make mistakes. What we want to do is we want to try to minimize those mistakes and then just get better. We want to strengthen that muscle on governance, and so this is just a good way to present that idea.
Can I ask a question? Did we spend time talking about the stakeholders? Because I think it's important to be clear who our stakeholders are, but I know even from the LSD training, it seems like we just jump right into goals and we don't talk about like who are all the stakeholders and then derive the goals from the stakeholders. So do we actually identify our stakeholders and talk about who they are?
Sure, absolutely, we can do that. So who do you think are our ultimate stakeholder in a school district?
Sure, I mean, it's the students.
The students, right?
But then you have staff and teachers. You have the community.
Mm-hmm.
So
anybody else? So we've got students who are really in the center, right? Students are in the center. And who helps lift them up? Our staff, teachers, leaders, principals, parents, right? Who else are stakeholders in the district?
I would say your taxpayers, even if they don't have students in the district.
I'm sorry, say that one more.
Taxpayers, anybody that lives within the district.
Okay. Who else? Are we missing any stakeholders?
What do you define exactly as a stakeholder? Because, I mean, if you think about a broader context, you know, our district's performance impacts the whole state's performance. Mm-hmm. So certainly we're accountable to also the legislature and the leadership too in our state. I mean, they definitely view themselves as a stakeholder. They have given themselves the power to take over our district if we don't perform up to their standards.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair assessment, but what is the focus? What are they saying that we want you to focus on?
Preparing students to enter the workforce and be, you know, contributing to our state's success, ability to provide a great environment to live, work, be.
With that in mind, I'd say we would add business and industry. When we're thinking about 21st century students, we're not just preparing them for nothing. We're preparing them for successful careers and families and life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that stakeholders are, kind of to Tiffany's point, stakeholders are anybody who pay for or benefit from what our school district does. Business and industry benefits from what we do. Students benefit. People who are employed by the district benefit. Property owners benefit. So that's how I define it. Anybody who pays for or benefits from all of the work and all of the manpower that goes on in our school district.
So maybe a better question is, who is your client? Who's your client?
Well, honestly, I think that's where people have differing opinions.
I'm sorry?
I think that's where maybe the differing opinions come in. I mean, long before I was sitting in this seat, I was sitting in those seats as an observer, as a parent, as a taxpayer, and depending on the meeting and depending on the topics in that meeting and who I was sitting by, people had different opinions on who the customer was. I think we can all agree, of course, that students and parents are customers, but when you go beyond that, I think that there's some disagreement. But we were the ones who were elected, so we will make our decisions and our goals consistent with what, we think. But I think that there's broad opinions on that.
So if you put your parent hat on, it's your parent hat. That's all I'm asking for. What's the most important thing to you? What is the most important client in a school district?
Children.
Your
My
children.
kids, yeah.
Your kids. Your kids. Public schools were designed to educate and provide opportunity to students, to children. So your client is the students. Now, you're right. There are a lot of stakeholders out there that are going to benefit from a great school district, right? Your property values go up. All of those things that are out there, that the reason that all those people moved here, right? But your responsibility is to your client, the children. The students are your singular client. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't care about educators, or that you don't care about parents, or that you don't care about business leaders or taxpayers but your singular responsibility as a board member, because if I'm a parent and I elected you to the board, my expectation is that you are creating a space where my child succeeds. I am trusting you with my children. That's what a trustee is enabled to do. That's what you were elected for. Now, oftentimes when we get imbalanced here, it's because we forget, where we get bogged down, and it's easy to do because there's so many responsibilities that you have sitting in those chairs. But oftentimes we can get bogged down in those other responsibilities, in those business relationships, in those adult relationships, right? And we forget, we lose focus just for a minute on that singular client. And when we do, then balls can be dropped. And when we don't plan long term to support those student outcome goals, those student experience goals, when we don't plan long term to do that, then we don't allow these guys to create strategies that are innovative. This is hard work. It's hard work to close gaps for children. It's hard work to increase, even if your kids are way up here, it's really hard to get them up here. But that's the job. That's the job. And so I think when we're sitting and we're having these conversations, and as you dialogue through this whole, through not just tonight, but as you're focused on everything. When I talk about finance, let me see. How are we resourcing the goals? How are we framing that on getting to our goals, getting to our outcomes? If we're talking about facilities, same thing. Those goals ought to be in front of you, and you ought to be looking at them and saying, okay, well, we identified this gap. Could a facility, could a technology help with that? And then you ask your leaders, how do you design that? How do you implement that? Could you do that? And they will come back with a plan, because that's their job. And so I think that's an important component. I think it's not an automatic thing when you get elected to a board seat to think in those ways. You come here because you want to help children. I've never heard a board member who didn't want to help children. Never, ever. Right? But are you going to center children? Are you going to make the hard decisions to keep them in the center? And not just some children, all children. And that's the hard work of being a trustee, but that is the opportunity that has been laid in front of you. And so we can go back to your one words and your excitement and your optimism. That's what has been laid in front of you. Does that answer your question about the stakeholders?
Yeah, I just wanted to have that conversation just to focus it and make sure we kind of knew.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other before we move forward? Any other comments or thoughts or questions? Triggers? Anybody triggered yet? All right, we're going to keep going then. Okay, so let's talk about, next slide, please. Let's just talk about the vision. Move to the next one, please. All right, where do we want to be? Next one. I'm a clicker. All right, what do you guys remember from your governance training? What's an input? Anybody? What's an input in governance work?
It's our teachers. It's anything that is getting our district working, doing its job, teaching our kids, the buildings, the teachers, the curriculum.
Right. Anything we're putting in at that beginning of the cycle, right? Money, buildings, activities, curriculum, teachers, evaluations, all of that. That's the input. Who owns them? Who is in charge of the inputs?
Superintendent.
Superintendent and their team. Those are theirs, right? So what about the outputs?
Those are the interim progress measures, assessments, I guess anything that could be looked at before final evaluation.
Right. Anything else? We're not going to wait till the end of the game, right? And make sure we won. We're going to measure. We're going to measure all the way through. Those are the progress measures. Who is in charge of those?
Superintendent and his team.
Superintendent, right, and his team. Okay, and then we have the outcomes, right? So we have two different types of outcomes. So you can go to the next slide. So you saw that, the outcome, it's the impact, right? It's at the end of the cycle. So what's an outcome in education?
Graduation rates.
Graduation rates.
College and career and military readiness.
Good.
Third grade literacy and math.
Okay.
These are the things that we have been told.
Are there outcomes? Are there outcomes in education that are important that don't have anything to do with students? Can you name one?
Yeah, teacher retention.
Teacher retention. What's a very big one?
Fiscal responsibility.
That's right, a balanced budget, a fiscal responsibility. Those are important outcomes. Tonight we're going to talk about student outcomes, however. So if we move forward, the next one, slide, I'm sorry. You've already identified, we can go to the next one, please. So the student outcomes, the outcomes are school system-wide outcomes, right? Student outcomes are a measure of what kids know and what they're able to do. And you guys know this because you just had governance training, but you know this innately. You know this innately because this is why school districts, schools, right, even exist. What do our kids know and what are they able to do, and how does that launch them into all those other stakeholder places that you talked about? Like the legislature, they care what students know and do because they want workforce, right? The parents, I know that I sent my child to school because I wanted her to be able to do whatever she wanted to do, right? I wanted her to be able to do whatever she wanted to do, and that was an outcome that I wanted. Some parents will say that their outcome is, I want my child to be happy. I want my child to be safe. I want my child to have opportunity. I want my child to go to Yale. There are all the different outcomes. And there is, whenever you have a conversation with parents, they will always give you student outcomes. They may not frame them in the student outcome goals that you're thinking about, but they will always give you student outcomes, right? And so whether it's academic or it's experiential, they will give you an outcome that they want for their children. And you have a framework to get them there for them, right? And so that's what we're going to work on. So we're going to start. We're going to get data sets from Cinto here. We're going to do this just a little bit differently because I really want you to spend some time talking to each other about the data. And I want you to think about things like trends. I want you to look at the different student groups. What I don't want you to do is just think about HB3 and go there immediately. I want you to have a dialogue about what are the outcomes. I don't even care if you get to numbers at this first thing. I just want you to have a dialogue with a fellow board member about the data. What are your concerns? What are your trends? What do you think your community cares about? What do you care about? What are the barriers that are being thrown in front of our children? If there is a difference between our black and brown children and our white children, then let's not look at that as a moment in time. There is a history behind that. There are barriers that have been thrown in there that have perpetuated that trend. And so it's going to take a little time to undo it, but does that mean we shouldn't try to undo it? We should try. And I think you had mentioned earlier that when we lift up academic outcomes, when we lift it up for all our children, right? So I want you to have that kind of conversation and and you might have to be a little vulnerable. And also, you know what's happened this year, right? So you think in terms, we're going to give you data that's based on STAR, but I want you to think beyond STAR. And thinking about one of the things that I think your leadership team is thinking about, which I think I'm so impressed is what are the intersections in these trends? Is it race and income? Is it geography? Are some of your schools doing better than other schools, and why is that? And what are all the different things that are tied into that? So that's where I want you to, when you start to look at this data, I want you to ground yourself in that space. Because it's easy to look at data and throw up your hands and say, how the heck did we get here? Whose fault is it? But that's not what I'm asking you to do right now. What I'm asking you to do right now is let's look at where we've been so we can get where we want to go. So we're going to give you some time. I want you to have dialogue about it. So we're going to pair up. We'll have 3. Let's see, we've got a couple
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes,
Sorry to interrupt.
yes, ma'am. Sorry.
It's over here. I'm sorry. So the data we're going to get is, I'm assuming, 2 years old. It's pre-COVID. Yes? I don't know.
No idea.
So I guess my concern is, I'm just wondering, are we going to do our goals based on pre-COVID? We've had a year and a half, and we've seen a lot of data, and the data's changed. We know the data's changed. So I don't know.
Yeah, so that's the thing is I know that we're required by HB3 to have 2 of our goals to be related to early literacy and numeracy. Is that right? So I think we'll look at the most recent data we have and we'll comply with that. But in my mind, when I walked in here today, my other 3 goals are not STAR related, and I'm just really eager to talk with you guys and share my ideas and hear yours, because I don't know at this point, given the trauma that our staff and students have endured for the last year and what they've sacrificed, I don't know that us coming up with 5 STAR-based goals serves anybody. I don't think it serves our community. That's my opinion. So I'm very willing to comply with the law on 2 of those goals, but my other 3 are not STAR-related.
CCMR, yeah.
So what I'd like you guys to do for this part is I don't want you to think about goals. I want you to think about student outcomes. Okay? Student outcomes that are important to you, that are identified in the trends of things that need to be improved. Don't get bogged down on trying to hit your benchmarks and your targets yet. Right now, thinking about student outcomes. Now, if student outcomes are not 3rd grade STAR, that's okay. Have a dialogue about it. What is important to you? What is the vision? Now, yes, eventually you'll have to provide 3rd grade literacy or early literacy and early math goals as well as CCMR goals to the state. But as a board, you have the ability to think about what is important to you, and also remember, is that framed in a goal or is that framed in a constraint? And yes, go ahead.
The law does not require us that those 3 required goals be STAR related.
That's right.
There's nothing in the law that says they have to be tied to STAR. And so, yes, we have to have an early literacy goal. Yes, we have to have an early numeracy math goal. Yes, we have to have a CCMR goal. But they do not have to center around STAR. Now,
They do have to have an evaluation system.
but they have to have an evaluation system. But it doesn't have to be solely STAR. STAR is a data point, and the nice thing about STAR is that everybody takes it in the state, so it's a comparison. But we certainly don't have to just focus on STAR.
Yeah, I wanted to echo what Trustee Vessa just said and encourage the board to be creative in setting these goals, because I think that was problematic in the past, is that the goals that were set by the board were so intensely tied to STAR, there was really not much else you could judge the performance of the superintendent by. And I think whoever the superintendent is comes in would appreciate that there's a more eclectic approach to what kind of job are they doing. And I appreciate Corey saying that, they don't have to be STAR related, they have to be assessment related, but not STAR related.
So can I ask, Mandy, do you feel like you have some good recommendations in your head on things that you're going to be offering us on those goals that are, academic and meet the HB3 criteria, but are not necessarily STAR related? Do you feel like you have some ideas?
I think we can make anything that this board wants to focus on work. And so yes, to answer that question, I think there are some assessments that definitely we could use for that if the desire is to stay away from STAR. But I think going back to what was said earlier, my desire for you all would be not to constrain yourself right now and let us do that legwork after you've got that vision set.
I just want to go back to what Dr. Bones said when you talk about where we're going. And when you put the slide up there earlier when it was talking about vision and it said, where are we going? The first thing that popped in my mind was, I don't know if we really know where we are right now. Just because of all of the chaos of a pandemic and everything that's happened in the last 12 months, I'm not 100% confident that we know exactly where we are. And I think it's going to be a big challenge. Ideally, when you set goals with Lone Star Governance, you don't change them for 5 years. So when we did this 2 years ago, I was like, great, check that box, this is done. But I do think that we have been afforded a good opportunity because of the pandemic to revisit goals that were heavily laden on STAR and be creative and think out of the box. And that's also another blessing based on, I'm not real sure we know where we are. We have some kids that are doing assessments, some kids that aren't, some kids that are, just really suffering because of the conditions of the world right now. So I think that this really allows us the opportunity to be creative.
And I guess I would say, though, I don't think we know where we are, but I know when we looked at the data in our training, the trends have been the same for a very, very long time. So when we're looking at just trends and we're looking at how, when you go back 10 years and it's the exact same thing, I don't think we need to know exactly where we are right now, because we're where we were, maybe a little bit worse in every category, and they're probably the same distance apart. is where we
And I would agree
are.
with you. And I think that was more of pointed at a baseline of what are we looking at as a baseline. And if you know what your baseline is, then you know where you can really go and what's your long-term vision. And I'm not sure that we really know what our baseline is anymore. And in terms of planning out 5-year goals with growth every year and a target. And
luckily, we don't have to do that. Yeah. they're going to have to come up with that once we come up with the big ideas. So,
I guess, though, President Weir, one of the things I would caution us to actually assume that those trends are the same. The only reason I do that is because some industries have been hit harder, and I think there's some students that I think this may impact. So I don't want to make those assumptions. I'm with you with the trends that they're going to be there, but with the assumption that they've moved the same amount, I would be really cautious that coming next year we may have student groups that it's really affected more than others, and that somehow we make sure we know that and not. I just don't want us to make. I would prefer us not to make those assumptions.
I was just going to say, in a perfect world, I think we would write 5-year goals, but given what we're coming out of, I don't know that it's that in this month or these weeks that it's going to be realistic coming out of what we're coming out of to commit to 5 years. I think 2 years is probably going to be more realistic. And it's kind of like, when you get married, year 1 of marriage looks very different than year 12 or year 15. And so that's where I'm coming. That's a concern that I have.
So I think that's a fair concern. I think you all have brought up some really important things. And you're right. We have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to identify what is important to you for a student outcome. Those goals, the trends, that's old data. We don't know where our kids are, but there probably is. I think we're probably getting a feel for it. I'm sure that your leadership team is working on that. And they can come back and give you that information. But there still may be things that are important to you as a vision, as setting a vision for your school district, right? Do you want your kids to be able to read? You want all the kids to be able to read. That's probably, something that's important. But there's a lot of dialogue that you can have. And as far as the 5-year versus short year, I think, we want to set, especially if you're hiring a new superintendent, I would say you would want to set these goals out there so that you have created a space for that leader to lead in, right? But you have set an expectation. That's why the targets are movable, right? You can adjust targets. You could say, look, we set a 5-year math goal, and instead of saying we're going to have even, like let's say it's a 20-point goal, we're going to have...
Well, I'm thinking more not academic. I'm thinking, for me, I foresee, I'm going to advocate with my colleagues to have some sort of a culture or social emotional learning goal. And my guess is that for the next year or two, that goal is going to be pretty intense, and there's going to be some expectations. But probably after a couple of years, hopefully, the student need in 2 years won't be what it is today. It's not really the academic stuff, but I think we need to be realistic because hopefully we're going to pull out of this. And hopefully in 2 years, we can maybe we won't need the intensity of that kind of a goal. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that kind of a culture goal is something that probably sits in the values, and those are adjustable every year. So you could do that. So unless you have any other questions, I think you can have this kind of dialogue together and really just talk through it and look at the data packs. If you want to ask questions, you can ask the questions of the leadership team, but I would prefer that you guys just kind of dialogue together, just thinking broad strokes. Let's just think and identify trends. And I would say that these goals, let's just put the ones that you already set aside and use the opportunity that you mentioned to look at it, especially since we've got some new folks here on the board. Okay? So do you guys want to pair 3 here, and then let's split. Can we have a more seasoned trustee with a newer trustee? So as you could maybe switch. I know that. There you go. You can even bring your name. Okay, we're going to I want you to just spend some time. Let's see how 30 minutes feels, and then we'll see if you need more time. But this is about dialogue, because eventually you're going to have to navigate these down. Like you guys may have, I want you to come up with 10 student outcomes that are important to you. 10 student outcomes that are important to both of you. And we're going to narrow those down by negotiating with each other. Okay? So we're going to start, you 3, you got a harder time because you have to get stand between the three of you. All right.
Shall we go ahead and, are we?
I think we got 10 or more.
Yes, we got more than 10. Are we gonna, should we just go ahead and take a break and come back at 7 and start with this, or?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. Is that good with y'all? We'll come back at 7 and pick this back up. It is 7 o'clock and we are back into session. And yes, I'll turn it over.
Okay, how'd that feel? How'd that feel coming up with 10? Good dialogue?
It's a challenge because I think the instinct is to set not the outcome, but like the output. Yeah,
the output.
That's what we struggled with. I think was sort of vacillating between those things.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of our 10. They're good.
All right.
They're A+ material here.
Okay, now we're getting a little.
Let's see here. Let's see what other people will. We'll grade each other.
Okay. All right. So now what I'd like you guys to do is I'm going to mix you up. I want you to take your 10, and we're gonna move you guys around so that you're with different partners, and then you need to get them down to 5. So you're going to have to negotiate. You're going to have to have a dialogue with each other to get them down to 5. I'm sorry?
I can take a picture.
Oh, yeah. All right, we're going to modify them.
In the Air Force, we learned that flexibility is the key to air power.
So we're going to write, we're going to get it down to 10 total. So somebody's going to lose some, okay? So this is about negotiation. This is about dialogue, but we'll do it in a group, in a big group. Is that all right?
So that works for us because we only came up with 7. So we've already given up our 3. So yeah.
Okay, so let's see if we got any that match first. Let's start with this group, or Trustee Weston, do you want to share like one of yours?
So I'm going to pick this one. We want to increase the level of parental satisfaction amongst our...
Okay.
Well, can I finish?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to increase the level of parental satisfaction among our special education students.
Okay.
And we actually asked ourselves, is that a student outcome? And the only parent on our school board who actually has this lived experience was in our group. And she said that this is a student outcome.
Can I say it a different way? Oh. Through all theirs first? Okay.
Just one.
Go ahead and clarify it.
Well, so I did say that I wasn't sure exactly what that measurement would be, if there was even an existing measurement to somehow take a look at that, and if that parental, because some of our special education students may not have as much of ability to share that as we would measure with a typical student survey and satisfaction survey. So somehow incorporating the parental input into it. agree with you that a parental survey is not a student outcome or even an output, maybe it's an output, but somehow having a goal related to special education and their satisfaction in the services that they're receiving.
Okay. So, thank you. I might need one more. Okay. So that's fair. For the purposes of this exercise, we're going to say that because it doesn't focus on what students know and students can do, we're going to say that that's a value statement, an important value statement, but not a part of the vision. Getting to the vision is what students know and what they can do. How we get there, by keeping our parents engaged, by making sure that they are satisfied with the level of work that we're doing, especially for students without agency, is super important, but it's a value.
So let me follow up with that, because I felt like in the direction we were giving was don't have to have the specific measure, just have an idea of what we want to talk about. And that's, I think, what we were going for in this goal is maybe there is something other than graduation rates, because let's be honest, there's some of those kiddos in that population that are not graduation type. They're not going to have a traditional diploma. So that may not be a great way to measure their growth. And there is such a variety of differences in our special education population that there may not be one unique measure. So that's when we wanted to look to staff who are more familiar with it, how maybe it's the number of kids that are meeting their individual goals. I know that the packets that you get, it tells you if they're on progress or, progress C, M, or NP, I think are the three categories. So something like that to measure from an individual basis, but somehow have a special education related goal.
Absolutely, and
this
is a priority of mine. If special education does not make it to our goals, then I'm not really sure what I'm doing here, you guys. And I think that sometimes because there's a challenge on how do you set this goal, how do you measure it, I think that's why it's gone unmet for so long. So, I could say increasing the level of parental awareness of their rights, of the resources that we offer. We can drill down into all these different things that I've been hearing for years, but this is big and this has to happen. I won't be signing on to goals that don't include the prioritization of improvements in our special education department.
So, can I ask you a question along that lines? If we have, Cindy, can I get that other dude? Sorry. What do you want our SPED students to be able to do and know? I know there's a lot of things, but what is one big one for you?
Well, I want all of our students who have special needs to be identified at the appropriate time. I want their parents to be educated on what their rights are and what their resources are. I want there to be two-way communication. I'm going to
interrupt you. I want you to focus on what do you want the children to be able to know and do?
I want the children to be able to know and do the things that they're entitled to be able to have access to learn and do. I want to make sure that they're getting that access with fidelity, that they're getting that they're being identified in the first place and not when it's too late for intervention to work. I want them, and if it's not happening, I want them to have the opportunity in a formalized way of communicating that.
Okay. I would say that my expectation for students that are in special education is no different than any other student at a district. I want them to hit their highest potential, and whatever that means for whatever that particular student is. And I don't talk about my own life very much up here, but I have a kid in the Talented and Gifted program, I have a child in general ed, and I have a child in special ed. And my goal for them is all exactly the same. I want you to hit the highest potential that you possibly can. So that's what mine is, in very brief statement, is whatever that child's highest potential is, then that's what my goal is for them.
So I think so we've got it over here. We got it in two places.
Is this where we can add our +1 to that? Like if we have one that agrees, can we add that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. What do we have that agrees with SPED?
We have that students learning disabilities are identified as soon as possible. And we have that those identified learning disabilities are remediated as soon as possible.
And I want to be specific nested under SPED, identified dyslexia. We hear a lot about dyslexia.
Well, okay, so then we're going to join in because our group also had, we were kind of looking at the reading and math framework. So we said struggling with reading.
This is for SPED children?
We wanted a goal. The way we framed our goal was those struggling with reading identified by end of first grade with a low bar for the definition of struggling. And I don't know what that would be, but I think sometimes we put a high bar on what is struggling, and somebody who's minimally struggling is still struggling. So that was what we came up with.
Do you want those
children?
So
we said reading, but I mean it would go under all of, if they're struggling in math, if they're struggling in any area, obviously as a broader context, I think to agree with the other groups.
Struggling academically? Yeah.
Okay. And so we need to define struggling.
Right, because I mean, we do hear a lot about dyslexia, and that was kind of where we were coming from in wanting that goal, because, and we had heard from some of our learning communities that really first grade was where the focus needed to be more than third grade, and so finding those kids, and if you lift up the least, the most struggling, hopefully you've lifted up everybody. So,
okay, so students struggling in academics, we want to address that, and you want to address it early in first grade. Is that right? Did I catch that?
I'm a little reticent to identify it like first grade because, man, how many conversations have I had where people say, well, there are some kids that are just not developmentally, it's not like that they're struggling, they're just not developmentally ready at 6 years old to be at that level. So it's not like they have any type of deficiency other than they are developmentally not ready. So I think that's why a lot of times they say third grade, because there's an expectation that by 8 or 9 years old, most children will be developmentally ready to perform in those academic expectations.
Can I push back on that just a little bit, though? Because I think that's one of the, I don't want to say excuses, but that's a very easy label to put and say they're not developmentally ready, they're fine, we'll just keep going and wait 2 more years. But maybe that's really not the case. And especially when we've heard about the dyslexic students in particular, just if you don't catch it early, it's going to be a problem for the whole rest of your life. And so if we wait and say, we think they're fine, and we wait till third grade, I worry that that's not quite enough.
You're missing out on a lot of foundational learning too. Like by third grade, it's already a big problem, and there's shame attached, and there's lots attached to it. Versus, I think this is something I've come to learn about dyslexia that I don't think I understood, was that there's like a number of students that you want to identify, like a number that they're looking to identify that should naturally occur in the population. And it's better to identify early. Can staff give input first versus third grade, identifying any kind of issue?
So I would just say that I do totally agree with President Weir. I think that developmentally not ready could be a dangerous path to go down, and I think people mean well, when they say that, but they're trying to give grace to the student when probably, and sometimes even to the parents who may not want to or be ready to acknowledge that, hey, there's something we need to intervene with right now. So, and I do agree, the earlier that we can identify kiddos, the better. So I don't know if that answers the
My
question,
guess is
Trustee
that-
Harrison.
My guess is that you guys said first grade because you know that there's an inflection point of third grade that we know that the data tells us that, or the research tells us that once you cross third grade, that the likelihood of catching up is very small. So I think that's probably what you tell me. Is that why you said first grade?
Yeah, so I have a dyslexic daughter, so we went through this, and she was caught later. And what most people don't realize is it affects math and reading. By third grade, it really starts to affect math because you're starting to get into word problems. So yes, that is why, is that it becomes a much more, and it also becomes more obvious then, right? Because now it's affecting them, and you can't understand. So yeah, we said first grade. There's some, there's some studies that Amy had heard. So that's why we picked first grade. Plus the dyslexia, I've heard that also from the dyslexia parents. It's a national, first grade is a big push to have these children identified. And it's not just dyslexia, though, by the way. Like we were talking about, there are there's other conditions that cause, reading and math, I assume. So it's just, but yeah, we were saying first grade. They've had kindergarten, they've had first grade. I'd also like to say that if we don't identify them to first grade, you're really not identifying them until second grade, right? Because you actually identify them at the end of first grade. So if you don't identify them in third grade, you're actually identifying them in fourth grade. So that's something to keep in mind.
And just one more thing, it ties into CCMR as well, because when we think about your fifth grade math is a really pivotal math year, and that sets the stage for your advanced math courses, which sets the stage for your CTE courses, your ninth grade and high school. If you don't have advanced math, then it's sometimes really difficult for you to navigate engineering, which I know is, something that this board cares about, or some of the more science-based courses. So that's why I think early identification is vitally important, because if you're not identifying till the end of third grade and then there's remediation that needs to take place by fifth grade, they're behind.
And I think we have that data here. I think it may have, Mary didn't remember, so it must have been before y'all got on, but actually Stony Point, Natalie Nichols gave a presentation, and first grade was what they're really starting to focus on.
And I'll just say, this, the fact that this has been an area of improvement for a long time is not unique to Round Rock ISD, okay? So this is a big opportunity for all of us, for our next superintendent, because I believe it's doable. It just requires focus, attention, and resources. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's sit with this. We've got a SPED goal. We've got some different ideas around this, around academic, addressing academics, students struggling. I think we've come up that we know we want it prior to third grade, so we'll address that. How do we identify them? How do we make sure that we've got differentiated learning so that we're addressing the needs of those kids, I think is what I heard. You didn't use those words, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. But I thought I heard, different kids are at different places, and we want to make sure we're reaching them, right? Okay? So what's another one? What you guys? What do you got?
What do you want to do? We have so many. Okay, well, we were kind of just generic in our first three. We just said, are they in track in third grade math? Are they in track in third grade reading? Are they prepared at graduation to be successful in their next endeavor? Okay. Those are all like just the state requirements. Okay. And then we did our two that are about SPED or learning disabilities.
Mary and I took it, and jump in. I don't want to do all the talking, but we took that a little bit further. We did look at third grade, but we also looked at fifth and eighth, because fifth and eighth are both also the years, where you've got a transition to a new learning, middle school to high school, but we wanted to look at the lowest performing group in each of these areas, and really just focus on them. I mean, we kind of had the theme, you'll get it as you hear all of ours. We were focused on lifting the bottom in our discussion. So, like in third grade, math, it's our black students that were performing the lowest. So let's just focus. I mean, maybe we need to focus right there. It's our English language learners. Now, we didn't have SPED or low SCS on here, so I know y'all were talking about where there's convergence. So there may be, we maybe need to tease that out a little bit, but we focus especially on elementary, and it's important, but we were really thinking about 8th grade, because 8th grade is the year, and we're not going to focus on STAR, but you take 5 STAR tests in 8th grade, and you've got to know science, history, math, reading, and writing, and, I think that's the only history one, right? So we've not done anything, and then all of a sudden you've got to take this test before you can move on. So, and I don't even know how it would happen, but maybe there's a way. We didn't really form a true goal, but how we can monitor, make sure that as we get up to that pivotal year, everybody's ready for all 5 of those. I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah, I think there's some kind of core skills is what we were thinking. It's kind of a theme of ours is that, we focus, and the state, I think, makes us focus on math and reading, but there is writing, right? Like they have STAR writing, so there's these core skills, and even history, knowing a little bit about government and things like that. So it's these core skills that we were kind of thinking about before 8th grade.
So when we think about 8th grade, I'm going to ask the experts here. We think about 8th grade, and they do take a lot of, that's a pivotal year for testing, right? Is there a particular core subject that you feel 8th graders definitely need to have a grasp on for them to move forward? And is there an area of struggle where you see for kids across the board, or maybe a particular population of children?
I would say math and literacy, but especially in this district, because so many kids take high school math in middle school. In the math arena, I'd almost push that down a little bit lower so that we are able to push more kids into the advanced math courses. Because the kids that are sitting in 8th grade math, on-level math, almost by default become behind their peers because so many are already in Algebra 1 and geometry. So I know that's been an interest before of this board of looking at the math pathways, and not that we want to push any child into a course that they're not ready for, but how do we get our kids ready for advanced math in middle school, because that opens the gate for some of those more rigorous high school courses.
Okay, thanks.
Patricia, I'd like to go back to the goal that Amy just brought up about just addressing, the lowest performers in a certain group. And we talked about it over here is, the learning gap between, if you're just looking at races, is significant. Mm-hmm. But we had these concerns about just addressing one particular sub-pop. And is that going to mean, I'm not happy when you look at, even like our white students at 60% that are, think we could do better than that. So if we just address one population, are we forgetting, you brought up black, so we'll talk about that. That's 9% of our population. So if we have a goal that's addressed to just 3rd grade African American students, that eliminates 91% of the rest of our students. And so it's one of the things that we struggled with 2 years ago when we were developing goals is how did we look at this data on a disaggregate so we weren't forgetting things and we weren't overlooking these populations, but also having goals that were inclusive to the entire population of Round Rock ISD. I don't know if I have the answer to that. Okay, I don't have the answer to that. I don't know what the language is, but I want to make sure that if we're setting goals, that we are looking on a broader perspective and really pushing for the best of all of our kiddos.
Well, I guess the reason that came up in our discussion is, well, during, I don't remember if it was SLI or TASB, but there was a presentation given, and the presenter, and so I'm assuming there's data that backs this up somewhere, and I could probably go back and find it, but what he was saying was, if you do pick that lowest performing group and you work to bring them up, everyone in the classroom benefits. It actually brings everybody up. And so, that was sort of where our thinking was coming from with choosing that. And we had also written down the constraint that, we wouldn't want any scores to drop for our current high achievers. That would be a constraint that you would probably have to go along with that. But that, and if it was just one of our goals, I mean, it is kind of bold, but it would be interesting. Like, if there is some data out there that says it, could we do that? And could we see that? Does it bring everybody in the classroom up?
Well, maybe that's a question for the staff. I mean, what do you guys see? I mean, do you see that? Is that a trend that we see in education? Because I do know I've heard this before, too, that if you kind of pull the bottom up, that usually everybody rises.
So what this is making me think of, and I may not be completely lined up with that question, but a great measure for our system, I think, is growth over time of cohorts of kids. And so for me as a principal, it was always very difficult when you compared this year's third graders to last year's third graders to the third grade group before, especially when you consider that you have kids coming into you as a new third grader in the Round Rock system. And so I don't know if that's something that you'd want to consider, tracking kids as they move through the system as a cohort. And then perhaps you even separate out the continuously enrolled, which are the kids who've been here for 3 years and they've been with us. And how quickly then are we also working with the kids and accelerating the growth of the ones who are non-continuously enrolled. Because you won't often see in just a single year that sudden shift of a kid that's off level to now all of a sudden they're on level. But what you hope to see and what research will show is the impact of strong teaching year over year. And that's a real test of our system, because it's our job as leaders in the district to train the teachers, to resource the teachers, to provide all the supports that they need. So for me, growth over time really shows the strength of whether or not your system is performing well. And you would want growth to be accelerated for those who are not performing as well as some of the other students are. That's just my 2 cents.
But I guess the question, though, is there data that, and I can't remember who the presenter was, quite frankly, and I will have to go back and look. But, I mean, is there data that says if you focus on only one group and try to bring up your lowest performing group over time, does everybody come up with them? Or are you really just keeping the top static and then you're bringing the bottom up? Which that may be a valid goal in and of itself. I mean, I guess I'm just curious.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with if there is or isn't. I could certainly check into that. I would caution that if we and I don't think that's what's being said, but I don't think you want to keep your top group static either. You want, in my mind, you want the, you
yeah, so now that you've got your hands out, I don't want to interrupt Tiffany, but go ahead, Tiffany, I'll go after you.
Yeah, so all ships do rise with the tide, right? You want to teach to the margins. So like even when we're talking about special education, like teaching to the margins, or a lot of times you'll see people teach on-level classes like they would teach AP classes, because that's going to bring up the on-level class as well. So all ships do rise with the tide, and I think that it is woefully inadequate. I'm going to say a couple things. Number one, as a board, we need to get our act together around our understanding of racial and educational equity, because even the language that we use, I'm Black, I'm not a subpopulation. I'm not under any other population because I'm Black. And neither are children. And so for us to navigate this, we cannot just throw out random goals. We have to understand this. We have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we have to make a commitment to understanding racial and educational equity. For us to navigate this, we I think we need to name it, because that's been the outcome for groups of students of color for far too long. So to say, they're only 9%, so why would we just teach to them? Knowing that research does show that if we teach to the bottom, everyone will rise. And even if we're looking at growth over time, if the bottom stays the bottom, that's still a problem. What we want in this district, and what I believe that we can achieve, is comparable success across student groups. That should be our ultimate goal, is that we remove the predictability of who succeeds and who fails. And I think under that, I know we're not to goal progress measures yet, but I think that looks like looking at formal and informal systems that we may have in place that limit opportunities. And I'm the touchy-feely, I'm the feely trustee. I'm the one that has lots of big feels and emotions. And to me, one thing I'd like to look at is belonging. Do students feel like they belong here in Round Rock ISD? And this is an issue, with our points of contention about in-person learning right now. Students that are learning in person, some of them feel like they don't belong in person. Some of them may feel like their teachers resent them for being in person, right? And I don't think that's anyone's intention, but belonging is a very real thing. And when we look at race, and when we look at those early outcomes, and then we wonder, why don't we have black kids in AP classes? Number one, it's tied to some of our deficit thinking. If we're thinking of subpopulations, they're under, and that's the language we're using for them. Are we looking at them and thinking that they can achieve and they can be in these upper level courses? Are we identifying them in 5th grade for advanced math? I think our board has to be courageous and has to name the populations of students that we want to raise, and that will truly raise everyone up. And I don't want to be the only one to say that as the black trustee. And I'm not okay with marginal gains. I believe that we can look and see comparable student success for all student groups.
Yeah, I think that's what Amy and I were trying to do. So maybe we didn't say it right, but we definitely want to take and bring everybody up and have the comparable success, and stop seeing these disparities between these groups. I want to see one line and everybody's on it. And it's super high achieving is our goal. And that's what I think, us as a board, you're right. We need to figure out how to do that, because it can happen. I'm with you.
So I have a comment here. Where do I start? The first, if you look at the document we have, the Asian Americans are missing from the curve. It's not intentional, but my point is that as an Asian American myself, I often feel that Asian American, you have this model minority myth. And for Asian American student, you have the model student myth. Academically, we're doing fine. So for those charts, it doesn't mean anything for our students. If you look at previous goals, the goals we had, none of those matter to Asian Americans. But we have 18% population in a school district.
Almost 19 and growing.
And 19 and growing. What are we going to do about it? If that this board goal has nothing to do with Asian Americans, what are we doing here? That's just my question.
I hear you on that, because I think that we need to name that. Just because Asian American students are doing well doesn't mean that we don't care about them and we don't name what they need to continue to be successful in all facets of education in our district. And I was upset that Asian American students weren't represented on what we got today.
So it's sometimes this kind of same feeling of belonging. Is there a connection between Asian American students with the schools? Are they going to other schools? It's still being the similar performance, similar successful that has nothing to do with particular campus or particular schools. Then why stay in Round Rock ISD? So that's just my
So when I struggled to figure out what the right words to use, and Mandy was using her hands, and I ended up using my hands. We have to figure out how we're going to articulate. We don't want this. We want this. And I'm struggling. I don't know what those words are, but is that what we all want?
Yeah, I think it's comparable learning success. I think that's what we want. We don't want to look and say, let's shift Black students 1%. We want to raise everyone up so that they are all experiencing success. And I want to ask if you can write belonging down, because I think that's a really belonging.
I think that's what I was trying to say, was that I didn't want to have one goal for just one subpopulation, and whatever that subpopulation is, I wanted to see this. And I may not be great in my word choices and things like that, but that's my intention, is how do we ensure that the top doesn't stay stagnant and we're just raising someone up to that. Let's raise up to a new top, and there not be a division at what's at the top.
Can I just bring up something real quick? I'm going to give an example, and that's going to illustrate a point that I'm trying to make. So one, we don't really talk about this in terms of our board goals, but we definitely look at it, is how well our students do on the national merit PSAT in the district. And we definitely have, some standouts, students, groups. They do awesome. And I made a point at a previous meeting, are we doing anything different at Westwood to make them have 78 students who were national merit semifinalists? And the district responded, no, we offer the same programs for every group, every campus. So they're doing amazing. They don't have any different programs. It's insane amounts of effort to get to that point. June and I live in the same group, same area. I remember one year, my next door neighbor, they're a Chinese family, we went and we asked them, it was the day before school started, and we asked her if she would like to come over and play and enjoy the last day of summer break. And she said, I cannot come, I have 4 hours of homework. I live in this community, okay? They work insane amounts. They are trying so hard. They are working constantly. They are doing awesome because of the amount of effort they are putting in. Jun, are you going to agree with me here?
Yeah, so we talked about that, and the way I articulated it was what I see over there is that the culture and the community there already has their own goals, and they invest time and resources, and they don't necessarily articulate or publish, but in practice they have their goals, and they invest time and resources in it. And he mentioned the belonging thing. So you talked about belonging, and that was another one of our student outcome goals. This goes back to culture, feeling connected to your school. I hope that we can, bridge to that at some point.
What I was trying to get at is if we're saying that we're all going to come to this high bar, we have to recognize what it takes to get there and identify that, okay? That is not, it doesn't just happen. They are I've spent my children's entire education in this neighborhood, and I'm just utterly dumbfounded at the amount of effort, time, dedication, all focus. And I just don't, when we say that that's the bar, we want everybody to get to that line where they are. There has to be commensurate effort. It's not just happening.
I'd really like for us to have some equity training as a board, because I feel like we're getting into pretty dangerous territory where people are going to say some really messed up things without meaning to. We cannot continue to have these conversations without the language to have these conversations. And I feel like that needs to be a priority ASAP. It needed to be a priority previously. There are formal and informal systems in place in our public education system that limit opportunity for marginalized students of color. There are formal and informal systems in place that put pressure on students that are AAPI, Asian American and Pacific Islander, that place them as a model minority, that cause additional stress. We have to commit time to understand and know what we're talking about.
So I'm gonna pause because I think that there are some triggers that are, and rightly so. So when we are talking about student outcomes, comparable success, anti-racist districts look at comparable learning success, right? So that data is not racialized. And culture is an important play in that, obviously, and so is the barriers. Remember, this is not, looking at data at one point in time does not tell the whole story. Does not tell the whole story. So what we're trying to do is say, and it sounds to me like it is very important to all of you that all our students, all Round Rock students, have the opportunity to be successful. And that there needs to be some differentiated effort put into each student's life and learning life, right, to get there. And you talked a lot about the special, how your heart spoke to the special needs children, to the SPED group, and what that looked like, how we could identify, how we could make sure that they had differentiated learning. I think that's the same for all of our students, right? And culturally, when I would like to hear for you, if you had a specific goal in mind, like, what is that goal for all our kids? Like, do we want all our kids to be able to, read in third grade? All our kids.
Yeah, if there's a goal for me, if it is a goal for all kids, when I look at the program in the school district, I see the discrepancy between different programs: fine art, sports, and STEM education. We need to reduce this gap for everybody, not just one, any group, everybody, every student. That's what I see.
So when we set a third grade or a fourth grade or a fifth grade or an eighth grade learning goal, then to get that to go like this, like you were talking about, then we have to address gaps. We have to teach and address those gaps through the academic model. We have to resource things differently. We have to provide, and that there is data that shows that when we do that, when we put that in place, all students go up. That's what's creating that trend. So if we're setting goals, we can do it in two different ways. We can set an overall achievement goal. So let's say it's a fifth grade, third grade overall achievement goal with racial equity targets, or, and that pulls the numbers together. Now, they don't have to just be targets like on what you did with HB3. You can actually set racial equity goals underneath your goal. It's not I've seen it done in a couple of different districts, and it seems to speak to this, what you guys are trying to achieve, which is to de-racialize the outcomes.
If I could just add, we don't have the luxury of talking about like how many national merit semifinalists we want. I think it's entirely reasonable to say that we want, and I'm not saying that you did, Corey. You just let me finish. Where I'm thinking is that when it comes to being able to read, we should our goal should eventually end up that at like 100% or something close to it for every student can read, because that's predictive of so many things. And I don't think you have to like be way up here to get there. You have to be way up here to be a national merit semifinalist.
Well,
for
what
sure.
I was trying to get at is we were saying that we want all people to perform at the same high level. And what I'm saying, I agree with you that I think that I would prefer a goal that says we want all students to attain a goal that we feel is absolutely necessary for them to be successful in their endeavors beyond Round Rock ISD.
Yeah, because I mean, if we're not teaching all third graders how to read, we don't really need to be here. I mean, we need to bring in some people who can do that.
So can I just say that I think what we're saying is we want all kids to meet their potential, which is what Trustee Feller said. And I think maybe that's where we need help identifying, because you shouldn't see disparity in that, right? Like across all groups, there's some kind of model of kids and people and, IQs and where they would fall. And I think that's what we're trying to get rid of, right? We're trying to just all kids meet their potential, no matter, where they come from.
I guess I feel like we need to be more specific than that.
Oh, sure. But that's what I'm trying to say, though, is I think it loops back around to, for one, how do we talked about that, right? So we started trying to talk about that in the identification,
right,
of potential. That's kind of what we're doing, and that's where we started. And then we try to do this with reading and math. And I will say, I know we talk a lot about reading, but as an engineer, math is extremely important, and I think we actually wait too long, because if you're not good at math in first or second grade, I mean, you're still not going to be good at math in fifth grade probably. So I think that's what we need to focus on, is how do I identify the potential of the kids and get them to their potential? I mean, if they can be a National Merit Scholar, then we want them to be a National Merit Scholar.
I think that's a little bit of the rub here, is who gets to decide who has the potential.
That
is
actually,
the rub.
that was exactly what I was thinking, because when we've had, and this was before y'all were on the board, but when maybe you even pointed it out as a speaker, we look at our pre-K numbers, and there's not the racial difference, right, in our pre-K numbers. But then as soon as you start moving up the chain, then we start to see that. So somehow it's that, right? It's who is deciding the potential, because it's being decided right now.
Right. Well, I think
right?
that's
It's
what
absolutely being decided.
Tiffany was talking about, where's the formal and informal systems somewhere in place here
that limit opportunities.
Because
if all kids start the same, and then we see those disparities, and then we see it by racial groups. And this is what I want to be cautious about too, because what really triggered me, which I don't think you meant to say this, but if you're saying that Asian Americans work really hard and that's why they're successful, we could by default be implying that student populations that are performing lower just need to work harder. And I'm telling you, there are systems in place that produce these inequitable outcomes, and we need to be looking at the systems. That's why I'm relentless. I don't want to come in here and fix kids and not fix the systems that are producing these systemic outcomes. It's not just one or two kids. It's systemic. It's over time. And if they all start in the same place, are we having deficit thinking? Because I start to hear this language about this community values education. Okay, but when you say that, what are you saying? Are you saying that this community does not value education? And that's why I said, I think that it is vital for us to do our work, and I know we have a million things on our plate, so that we can courageously discuss what has gone undiscussed. I don't want to leave this board with the numbers like they have been.
Can I just clarify something? It's not that you bring up such a good point. This community values education. Okay, so and I would really appreciate if Jen would, because I feel like I'm seeing my lived experience. So I live in a neighborhood where I have interacted with many. I'm just talking about my Asian American friends. They have many abilities. Kids that are just off the charts, like genius, and kids that aren't. And there's this expectation that we will do whatever it takes. And that may mean for some students that they don't get any free time. They don't get to do extracurricular activities. All they do is focus on academics so that they achieve that high, they get there. There's no compromise. It's you will achieve this. And yeah, you may have to work 4 times harder than that other kid, but I will not accept anything less. Jen, this is my lived experience. You live in this neighborhood.
Can I just say something, Corey? Because actually, I'll brag on my nephew, because my nephew is a graduating senior this year in Oklahoma, and he is a National Merit finalist. So he did this, and he didn't do any of the things that you're talking about, and his family didn't do that. So all I want to say,
what I'm saying is,
I know, because I'm going to back up what Tiffany's saying, in the fact that all those families are doing is filling in gaps that the school is not fulfilling. So my nephew didn't do after-school tutoring or any of that kind of stuff. But I will say my brother and I are educated, and we came from very poor backgrounds, so we know things that need to be done. And my brother did fill in some gaps. And that's what we're here to do. We're to make sure that we fill in those gaps for all the students and that they all become National Merit finalists, the ones that can, right? Because we just know that there are some kids that, like you said, aren't going to get there. So that's all they're doing. They're just filling in those gaps, and that's what we're here for. And that's what we're trying to say, is that students shouldn't have to go to after-school tutoring to become a National Merit finalist. We should be providing that in our school systems. That's why we pay taxes.
And I'm going to take one quick pause. Oh, go ahead.
No, I
really want you to talk.
Well,
because I'm really courageous here, and I'm going to pay for it, and you all know it. You're all looking at me, and you go, she is going to be beaten up severely. This is like political suicide for her. But I'm sharing my lived courageous experience right now. Okay? I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. All right? So this is my lived experience.
And I'm telling you that I'm a black woman. I grew up in this district. I did not grow up poor. My parents had money. We went to Hawaii every single year of my life up until I was 15 years old for a vacation. I went to Baylor University. I have an MBA. Graduated top of my class. Got some of the most scholarships. Danced on the dance team at Baylor. Did all these things. And I will tell you that my 10th grade math teacher looked at me like I was stupid. And I went from being in pre-AP advanced math and dropped out because of how I was treated. I'll tell you that I'm the oldest of my family, right? So my parents had to navigate the system that wasn't built for me, that didn't necessarily recognize my brilliance. There was a learning curve for them, for how to get me into these advanced classes, for how to advocate for me. So I'm not talking about someone else's lived experience. I'm not talking about June's lived experience. I'm talking about Tiffany Nicole Harrison's lived experience with 2 wonderful parents married to the day my dad died, that were present in the home, that were very successful, that still had this experience where it was a system that really made the outcome hard for me. And I'm telling you, I've taught in this system. And what I don't want us to do is I don't want us to punish students who we have systemically disenfranchised. And I'm including myself. Let me be courageous. I'm not just talking about white people. We have mostly white educators. I'm a black teacher, and I have contributed to these inequities. And I'm saying that it is vitally important that we take the time to learn how to talk about it. Because until we do, we will be unintentionally offending and harming people. I know that's not your heart, Corey. I know your heart.
I think that the thing that becomes so difficult is you know how hard I've worked at this. I've spent oodles of time trying, okay? I'm doing everything I can. And I don't know that I'm ever going to get there. So if we can't have the conversation until we're all perfect and educated, I don't know that I'm ever going to be educated enough to never offend anybody.
You don't have to be
And,
perfect,
like,
but I need you to listen more than you talk.
We're going to pause. We're going to pause because, and I think, first of all, there was a lot of truth spoken, and I think it's important to recognize that your truth is your truth. Your truth is your truth, but neither of them are the truth for every child in the district. And so we have to come back and circle. First of all, I would highly recommend racial equity work as a board. It's a braver thing to do. I understand that it is also difficult and hard, but it is grounded in language. It is grounded in a lot of different things for us to get to.
I don't know how to do better, okay? I've gone through all the training. I've gone through it all, and I'm still failing, okay? I can't have this conversation because every word I say is wrong. I can't speak my truth because I'm going to offend somebody. And so what ends up happening is nobody says a darn thing because we can't say anything right.
Yeah, I have the same feeling. Sometimes when I try to say something, everybody has different life experience. You grew up in the neighborhood. You grew up as African American. I grew up as Asian American. I come from a different country. I speak different language. Everybody's life experience is different. And sometimes it's really hard to find the right words that doesn't trigger some other meanings. We all here are working for every student, truthfully. I don't care if you're white, if you're African American, black, if you're Hispanic, if you're Asian. I care about every student. Truthfully, I think Corey is. Maybe we cannot agree on certain concept or certain definition of words, equity, or whatever things. Those are just words. If we translate into another language, it doesn't make sense at all. If we keep beating on other people on, you don't understand this, you don't understand this, yeah, we don't understand because we don't have share the same life experience. We might have some differences, but if you only look at the differences, we're never going to work out anything better than for everybody.
This board needs to take the time to understand. There is no way around it. The board needs to take the time to understand, point blank, period. I will not back down on that. This board needs cohesive, not one-off, not one workshop, not one Joyce James workshop, not one book study that we don't follow through on, cohesive training for racial equity. It is just as important for black students as it is. Round Rock ISD speaks over 92 languages. Does anybody know what those top 5 languages are? The other 3 are Indian dialects. Tamil, yeah, right. So when we talk about this, we're not just talking about a black-white dichotomy. It is imperative for every single student that we have the language of racial and educational equity and culturally responsive education, because the largest growing group in our district is AAPI.
So if you look at, for example, the PTA-sponsored candidate forum. They have the translation for all the questions. One of the questions is about equity. If you look at the translation, I don't know about Spanish, I don't speak Spanish. If you like Chinese, Indian, all those languages, the word equity doesn't get translated at all. It's ridiculous. If you read it, I speak Chinese, so I read it. It doesn't make sense at all. It doesn't convey the information at all. So
Which is why you need training. What I'm telling you is this is something I've trained in. This is something I know.
It's culture related.
It is. And so we need training as a board on that. We need cohesive, committed board
I
training.
have done everything I possibly
Corey,
can.
you are
to-
centering yourself. It is bigger
But I'm
than
saying
you.
that if someone who's worked as hard as I have worked
You are
screws up every
centering
single time.
yourself.
Well, I just don't know what I feel like I
Listen
constantly
more than you
fail.
talk.
Okay, I think maybe we need to, can we take a break maybe for
Yeah,
5 minutes or so?
I'll lead us into a little break. I'll say this to the board. Leadership ISD, the organization, we've zeroed in on two major strands, particularly for urban and very diverse districts. And the two are governance and racial and ethnic equity. It is a language and a vocabulary that triggers most boards with the challenges that your data looks similar to a lot of other districts. And it is the two most triggering terms for boards that typically want to do things the way they want, and then the data points stay the way they are. So I'll say this as we get ready to transition to a break. Race isn't rocket science, it's harder than rocket science. And the reason is because we're not taught how to have the conversation in K through 12 school systems. And so we enter a space like this, having rubbings against one another, coming in with the feeling, thinking, believing quadrants, and we're all coming in and we're unintentionally bumping up against one another. We all have the intention. We're making that clear. We have this intention. And what we will tell you is if you don't lean into those two strands, there's a very high probability you'll stay on the same course. And the districts that are being uncomfortable to do these two frames of work, we told you when we started, there's a low probability we weren't going to get to our goals. This is not new to us. This is the norm. And so it's not to be a Debbie Downer per se. It's not to be deficit oriented. It's a reality of human beings, how we show up in a space within a social construct, within parameters and systems that I'm hearing clearly and loudly. Can we get better at the language that we use? Absolutely. You have to have that will and desire. Do I like the term, by the way, model minority? I know where that came from. I know what that implies. Do we know the histories of how we've gotten to this point? Do we know who designed the educational systems? Do we know the language and the power that's associated with that? If we don't, it might benefit us to take a pause and lean into that work so that we can find more common language and common vocabulary with the most explosive topic in our country. And yes, my friends, it is directly intertwined to the educational system. So why don't we take 5 minutes? Well, let's say 8:10. Let's take a little break. We'll come back at 8:10.
All right, back at 8:10. All right, it's 8:13, and we are back into open session.
So I think this is an important dialogue, and I applaud all of your bravery for having this. These are really, really hard conversations for every single person in this room. And I think what I heard from all of you is a desire to make sure that all our children are successful, and that we set goals and create a structure that allows all of our children to excel, right? So I heard, we talk about the systems that have thrown barriers in front of our children, have thrown barriers in front of our SPED children, have thrown barriers in front of our black children, have thrown barriers in front of our Asian children, our white children, all of those, there are barriers, there are systems designed that hold that back. So what I would urge you is, when we started this, we talked about this being a process, a journey, right? A journey to creating the vision that you want for Round Rock ISD. The vision you want and the values that you represent. And so I heard a lot of passion behind this conversation, a lot of passion behind this conversation. And so we're going to have to be able to, as a board, to find the tools to address this conversation, whether it's, however, we can initiate some tools within this conversation with the board work, but over time, if the idea is to get to what you talked about, right? To use the language with comparable learning success. And an anti-racist district where race no longer is the determinant for achievement, for success, or potential, then that's the goals that we have to start to think about. And what does it take to get to those goals? And then what are the systems that your educators can put in place to change those and eliminate those barriers? And what are the policies that you all can work on that not only remove barriers, but also lift up all children? And I think that's where you all want to be. I've heard that from you all. So we're going to adjourn tonight and think about this and kind of, right? You what? Okay. But I appreciate you going into this conversation. It's a difficult conversation, especially in an open forum where you have to be brave and you have to speak your own truth. So, as we said earlier on, we weren't going to probably get all of those to the goals, but we do have those outcomes, and I do want you to hold on to them. And I think we have a frame. I think this comparable learning success is something we can work on to get to where we want to go.
Yeah, so as Patricia said, we can offer tools. It's up to you as a board to choose what you want to do. We'll end the way we always start the work in governance, is that student outcomes won't change until adult behaviors change. That tagline was put in there for a reason, and the norm in public school education, governing bodies with diverse populations, as I said right before the break, the research is clear. And so we have opportunities. There's a new board. Wounds are not too long, we hope. And so we believe in how a board can work together and can heal together. And so we'll be here to support you as you see fit. Okay? Thank you, President Ware.
Thank you. I would just real quickly, we'll move on to H, board announcements and requests for future agenda items. I did want to let everybody know that I did sign the contract yesterday. It was pretty standard. Doug did insert a few paragraphs, but we are all good to go, and they're ready to set up our first meeting to do the timeline and all of that with the search firm. They need about 90 minutes. I don't know if you're available, Amber, during the day for 90 minutes at any point, but I'll have Patty send something out, so maybe we can even next week try to get that first meeting set up, get our timeline going, start working on our stakeholders and that sort of thing. I also did talk to Doug, and he will be inviting an attorney to talk to us on the April 15th meeting about single-member districts. So we will have a presentation on single-member districts at that time. Did anyone else have any? Ms. Weston?
Can you confirm what our meetings are next week? And then I have something else as well.
I think we have the 8th. On Monday we have a grievance, and at noon we have the legal update on the 9th. And that's all I have right now.
A CTE meeting on the 11th. Does anybody have that? Okay, I'll take that off.
I didn't think so.
So next week
Trustee Weston, that's in May. May 11th, I believe, is when that is.
Okay, thank you. So next week is just Monday night grievance, Tuesday midday legal update. Okay. Also, at some point, I think I'd like to hear what our goal might be for getting the public back in our meetings. I'm happy to participate in that planning, but I think we need to figure out what our goal is for that. Thank you.
Is that something, well, I guess, let me get with Dr. Presley and we can figure out if that's, I have no idea how that works.
I was in a elementary school first grade classroom last week before, with a classroom full of students. And so I'd like to start that conversation. It's important to me that the public have access to our meetings. So I'd like to figure out how we could move towards that.
All right. Are there any other announcements?
Yeah, I have 2 agenda items that I would request that maybe somebody, if another trustee would like this, that they get on. One of them is to have a conversation about the district canceling the district-wide proms. I put this up on the message board so you can see there, but I would like all the trustees to be aware that, as I understand right now, we have 2 of our 5 traditional high schools that have no plans for a prom from parents. And I think this is a conversation because obviously somehow the district knew about these parental proms. This just seems like something we need to take up. So I hope somebody else would also like to talk about that, and I hope it gets on the agenda for a very quick future item. The second one...
Well, let me just interrupt. I'm interested in that as well. I don't know if it needs to be an agenda item or if we can just ask our district to look at that to make sure everybody has access. So I don't know, Amy, if you think that can happen successfully offline, I'm open to that as well. I think it needs to be addressed.
Dr. Presley, is that part of our board update for tomorrow? Is there anything in there?
There was nothing planned, but I can discuss it with you and put something in there soon.
Okay. Let's start with that for sure, because I know that they have had discussions.
Yeah, I just want to make sure our kids are taken care of. That's really my whole goal, is that, you guys are seeing the emails fall in. You're going to we're just going to start seeing more of those as parents start looking for their prom and get upset that they weren't invited. And I will just make the comment, I don't think parents care who's organizing the prom. Prom is prom. It's associated with schools. So the second agenda item is that you may all be aware that Governor Abbott this week is going to be removing the mask mandate from the state. And TEA then, I believe, on Wednesday followed. And basically this is what he did, or TEA did. They said the governing board of a school system may modify or eliminate by formal action the above mask-related requirements. It says the governing board of a school system. It does not say the administration. It says the governing board, okay? I've said that 3 times, governing board. So it needs to be, I think, on our agenda, and I think we need to take it up, and we need to discuss this as a board, as the governing board, as TEA says, and come up with what we would like to do with this mask mandate. Thank you. And I hope somebody else will back me up and also want this.
Yeah, so I'll just say that I sent an email to the administration this afternoon regarding a specific student population with regard to masks. And absolutely, I can completely agree, Mary, if I think a discussion on that is warranted. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other requests for future agenda items or board announcements? All right. If there's nothing else, and if there's no objections, it's 8:23, and we are adjourned. Thank you.